Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's roughly 7 o'clock, so let's call to order the meeting of the Merrimack Planning Board for October 4th. Let me remind everyone to make sure the microphones are turned on, speak clearly into them. Don't forget to introduce yourself. Our normal minute taker is not here, and so they'll be making the minutes from the recording, and that means that I've got to make sure to recognize the people who make motions by name. But otherwise, speak clearly, make sure you introduce yourself for the folks at home. Although we're expecting some more board members, since we're a little short right now, we'll use both of our alternates for Lynn and Vinny. And so, at least for the time being, we're all in voting positions today. By way of announcement, let's see, our next planning board meeting is October 18th, 2016, 7 p.m. in this room, which is the Matthew Thornton room. Planning and Zoning Administrator's Report. Tim.
I don't have anything, but given where we are with things, if you wanted to bring up the potential for a second meeting in November, now might be a good time to talk about that.
Thank you, Tim, for introducing that. As you all know, normally, unless there's a particularly compelling reason to have a second meeting in November, we usually don't, because the second meeting usually falls close to Thanksgiving. This year, as it happens, the third Tuesday isn't all that close to Thanksgiving, and Nelson's been able to arrange for us a presentation on complete streets from Nelson. Who's the group that does that?
Well, it's the Heal New Hampshire group. That's and the New Hampshire Highways. I'm sorry, I don't have the exact right name on the tip of my tongue, but it's a group that's advocating the complete streets inclusion in planning, and it's a planning concept that involves streets and roads and transportation infrastructure, and they have been instrumental in getting these things started in several of the cities in New Hampshire, and in even in some towns in New Hampshire. And they're willing to come and brief us. They're behind the Complete Streets program in Nashua, and I thought it would be something that this planning board should be interested in and listen to their presentation.
I was certainly interested. I think HEAL is healthy environment, active living.
Yeah,
it's actually Rebecca Harris from Transport New Hampshire.
It's thank you,
Transport
you. Right. Okay, Transport New Hampshire is the correct name.
So with all of that long explanation, we will have a second meeting in November, which is November 15th. Is that right, Tim? Yes. And there won't be any other items of business on the agenda other than that presentation. I know that it puts an extra burden on Tim's staff to have extra meetings, although I think Robert had either volunteered with some encouragement.
He did. Robert is actually the one member of our staff who has not seen a Complete Street presentation, so he was interested in attending that night.
Yep. So, if you have already kind of marked your calendar for our future meetings and not put that one because it's not on that calendar we distribute every year, mark it. We'll be here. Put that in here. Are there any other items under the Planning and Zoning Administrator's Report, Tim?
I don't have anything else tonight.
Does anybody have any questions for staff? Seeing none, that brings us to item 3 on our agenda, which is Meridian Land Services, Inc. and Northview Homes Development, Inc., Bernstein Insurer, Sawyer, and Nelson, PA, all as the applicants, and Greenfield Management, LLC, as the owners. And this is continued review for consideration of final approval for a 66-lot cluster subdivision on 4 lots, originally part of the Greenfield Farm subdivision, located on Wire Road and Whispering Pines Lane in the R1 Residential and Aquifer Conservation Districts and the 100-year flood hazard area. Tax map 7C, lot 28, 30, 40, and 40-1. And this agenda item has been continued from our July 19th and September 6th meetings. Tim, is there anything that we need to know before we hear from Ken?
Just to update the board as to what's happened since September 6th. There have been no new plans submitted by the applicant to this stage. However, if you recall back in September, the plans were submitted very close to the meeting date, and staff didn't really have a chance to do a full and thorough review of the project. We can report that that has now taken place. We have new comments from Public Works. Several of the comments from the previous memo have been addressed. There's a few cleanup items that they've itemized in the proposed conditions of approval. I've had an opportunity to re-review the plans and go through the actually not CLD comments on this one, the comments from Keach Nordstrom, who's been acting as our peer review consultant on this particular project. When this was originally reviewed by Keach, there were 16 pages of comments and 139 individual comments, roughly. We've got it down to about 40 or so items left that have either not been addressed or are items that need decisions to be made by the board before they could be addressed by the applicant. So given where things stand, there are still a couple of items I know Ken wants to discuss here tonight. I think we're in pretty good shape that the board might be in a position to grant a conditional final approval tonight.
Thank you, Tim. Ken, although we see you just about every time, go ahead and introduce yourself before you let us know where we're at.
Thank you. My name is Ken Clinton with Meridian Land Services, representing the application tonight. And per Tim's brief comments and his memo dated September 29th, we certainly feel we're at a point where it's reasonable to consider conditional approval as long as we take care of a couple of key items. And just so from a record-keeping standpoint, I handed out a brief memo to not only Tim but also Bob as far as what those are, so if you needed to take notes, you could take notes on that. When we were here last month, we went through a range of topics, hopefully trying to knock off as many of those as possible, as I typically do. We had discussions on several of what I want to go through tonight, and hopefully we can make some final decisions on some of these, or if not all of them. One item in particular I'll start with is the question whether we were going to keep the stop signs and stop bars on our plan. We had shown them historically right from the start of the project, fairly early on the process when we met with Kyle Fox. He indicated he didn't think those were necessary. We had conversations here with the board as far as are there true engineering standard warrants to require them to be there. And while I admitted that perhaps there are no warrants, common sense and people being people, I felt it was a much better product to at least have the stop signs. Perhaps maybe not the bars necessarily, but at least the stop signs. I felt it was important to have that control. If you looked at the memo again, if you had any time to see, I believe that's Don Tuomola, as the new town engineer, authored a couple of comments, and it says the proposed stop signs and stop bars intersecting with Road A remain on the revised plan and should be eliminated. So it's still engineering DPW position that they be eliminated. I leave that to the board to make a decision. If it's your decision to remove those, so be it. If you like to have them stay, which is my preference, they'll stay. So I'll leave that up to you.
Just to follow up on that, I know I promised last month that I would come back with some samples and examples of other potential locations in town. There are so many of them, I couldn't possibly tell you where they all are. Basically, any subdivision that has a minor amount of traffic, the internal roadways and intersections do not have stop bars and stop signs. They are throughout town, and it's very common in Merrimack that we do not have the stop bars and stop signs in those locations that don't meet the warrants.
Thank you for the introduction on that subject, Ken. I've expressed myself thoroughly on the subject, probably more than is necessary. I support the stop signs. I don't really care about the stop bars as much as the stop signs. I do understand the question with warrants. I think that ultimately, regardless of what the planning board thinks, if you're proposing that the roads be accepted by the town, then that's going to require the DPW to weigh in and make a recommendation to the planning board and to the town council as to whether the roads are in the appropriate condition to be accepted, and that's where they get to make the ultimate final decision on stop signs. And since whatever we say is sort of advisory because of all of that process that's going to follow us, it doesn't make much difference to me whether we show them on the plan or not, since we're not the ultimate final decision maker. But my preference is to see those stop signs be there. I get the idea that warrants say what they say, but as an engineer, I also know that engineers fall in love with models and don't ever sort of pause once in a while to see whether their model actually comports with or spits out a strange result once in a while. And I think all of us that are engineers have done models like that have kicked out something, and you just say, well, wait a minute, we got to pause and see what's going on here. That said, whatever the will of the board is on that one. Nelson.
Could I ask just one question? These are going to be public roads, right?
That's correct.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify that. I, too, am in favor of putting the stop signs in there. I live in a small subdivision which has a private roads, and they have stop signs at very short intersections, very short cul-de-sac roads. And I think they, for once, not for once, but I think I agree with the applicant's feelings about this as far as safety is concerned, that they promote safety. I don't think that they cost that much to the town to maintain them over the years, and I don't really see why Kyle is opposed to them. And so for that reason, I would advocate leaving the stop signs there on the plan as he suggested.
Anybody else have comments or questions?
Well, the only thing I can add, Mr. Chairman, is it's not. I suppose it's the subdivision where I live. I can only concur with Mr. Thompson said. All these little streets around us, there isn't a stop sign amongst them. Only where the main road or the sort of feeder roads meet onto something bigger. But all the streets around where I live, there isn't a stop sign in sight until you get onto the main road. So, don't know.
Any other comments or questions? Tom?
Yeah, I've been somewhat opposed to putting stop signs in for the sake of putting stop signs in. I understand the concern about safety and stuff. I also understand that people are responsible and reasonable for the most part, especially when they're on a small street with 4 or 5 houses or something like that. And they're not coming blasting out onto the major road. My street, Danforth Road, didn't have a stop sign for a long time. It was frustrating when they put one in, not because now I had to make a stop, just seemed like it was unnecessary. However, it's coming out on the Natticook Road, which is a much busier road, and maybe it does make sense there. I had a lot of heartburn over the stop sign they just put in recently on the road that goes down to Horseshoe Pond, to Island Drive. Just because, again, the warrants weren't really required. People were used to not having it there. The difficulty there, though, is that folks come barreling off of DW Highway and down that little DW Drive road, and they can't see around that corner. So there are bushes and things that make it very difficult from a sight perspective. I don't know that you have that issue here. And so just because I hate to see us put any more regulations in than we need to, I'd prefer not to have the stop signs unless we feel like there's an absolute requirement for them.
Any other comments or questions? What's the will of the board? Is there a motion? Nelson?
I'll make a motion, Mr. Chairman, that we leave the stop signs on there as recommended by the applicant.
Is there a second for Nelson's motion? Second by Desiree. If there's no other discussion, all in favor of leaving the stop signs on the plan, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the motion fails 2-5-0. So the stop signs do not have to be on your plan, or should not be on your plan.
Understood.
Just for clarification purposes, for minutes and for results,
Yes,
there
yes.
really is no need for a motion in that particular case. It's just a consensus of the board. So as long as the motion maker and the seconder are okay, I'm going to handle this in the minutes as a consensus of the board rather than, because the motions that we'd be taking would be on waivers and ultimate disposition of the applicant.
That makes sense to me. I didn't know if on some of these where there might be at least some dissent that you could gather a consensus terribly clearly, but at any rate, whatever.
Either way.
Ken, give us your next bullet point.
We had a bit of a discussion last month as well regarding the off-site, if you will, water extension on Wire Road from the new Road A as it intersects Wire Road and heads south on Wire towards Lois Lane. The MVD comments that we had received didn't state empirically that there needed to be a design plan. It was in the comments both from staff as well as the Keach's comments and peer review. So we've gone ahead and prepared a plan for MVD to review, and that's pending their comments. So that we have indeed complied with that after all. It's not necessarily for further discussion, it just was more for your information, so that we have complied with that item.
I assume if we're going to consider taking final action on your application tonight, that it's going to be conditioned on complying with whatever MVD spits back for comments.
As the staff memo generally does, there's plenty of overlapping opportunities for boards and staff to comment. So yes, indeed.
Belts and suspenders.
Relative to the sewer main extension, we've had numerous comments or discussions about whether the previous separate extension plan set should be added to and become part of the entire plan set for the subdivision. I have stated repeatedly that I didn't believe that was appropriate. It is a separately approved plan set that stands on its own and not necessarily part of the subdivision. I'd go on to say that it's conceivable that that extension might have separate financing, which would then, it would need to be a standalone plan set. If it was then also incorporated and built into this plan set, that wouldn't be appropriate from that standpoint. And furthermore, it also might be separately contracted and constructed and ultimately accepted. So all of those items are separate and distinct from this particular plan. If you recall, I did state that I'd author a note, which became note number 25 in our plan set at the time, and that was based on conversations we had with staff. Currently, the note 25 reads, "No building permits shall be issued for any of the 66 cluster lots until the sewer extension, see Plan Reference 6, is accepted by the town of Merrimack." That was put on there to help connect this project and make it recognize that this is dependent upon the sewer extension being constructed and in this language accepted. Upon further consideration of that note, having it tied firmly to solely the acceptance is a bit problematic, because the acceptance process, once the construction is all the constructed infrastructure is in the ground, the sewer is operational, acceptance can be some time down the road, and that's somewhat of an uncertain time frame and date. Working with staff, I'd like the flexibility to consider adding some reference to bonding into that. So maybe there's an option that there's some sort of maintenance bond left as an option. I might propose something similar to this, and this is yet to be discussed with Tim or staff, so I'll just read this, that instead of having it end with "is accepted by the town of Merrimack," perhaps we might say "is constructed and either accepted by or bonded with the town of Merrimack," so that there's an option that it's not such a firm accepted sewer line, because that seriously could be months and a year or who knows when out from when it's constructed, thereby hampering the ability to actually pull a building permit.
I follow your logic, and I think that it makes sense to offer some alternative to being accepted, but doesn't this create the same problem that you were dealing with your plans, where now you've created an obligation to potentially bond part of a sewer installation that isn't part of this project?
The sewer installation itself is what has to be bonded,
but by somebody else who isn't here.
Point taken. However, in this particular instance, it is the same specific individual at this time.
I know, but you're the one that's fighting the distinction to say, let's keep the plan separate, because it's separate and it's distinct. I don't mind giving you what you want, but I think that at least from the planning board standpoint, all we were looking for on this issue is to, in the overview of your plan, show me where the sewer is going to connect to your subdivision.
And that's part two of this comment, is that we discussed that we indeed will add the extra annotation relative to the connection point, which is sewer manhole 82 on Whispering Pines Lane. We identified 3 locations in our plan set, sheets SP1, SP3, and P2, all have to do with the location of the sewer and the drainage and the infrastructure. One of those is the plan and profile for the new road A as it connects to Whispering Pine, and that'll have all of the proper annotations. See reference plan 6, see note number 25. This is the connection point of the off-site sewer main extension, and this is the exact connection point for the internal subdivision sewer. So I think having the flexibility to work with staff on the back end of note 25, and then with the addition of this text, takes care of that understanding and recognition that that you can't have the subdivision without having that sewer main
Yeah,
extended.
I think that it does. So when you talk about manhole, what did you say,
It was
85?
82.
82. Are you talking about indicating that in a note or actually showing that graphically on the plan?
Graphically,
That's what I
so there'll
want.
be notes on the plan, but there's going to be 3 locations in the plan set that it's clear that it's tied together.
Okay. I think that satisfies all the concerns that I have.
Yeah.
Tim, did you have different concerns, or am I not seeing the solution the way it ought to?
No, I'm trying to write how this comment's gonna be revised. I think what I've got is that we'd be revising Don's comment M regarding the sewer manhole 83, that the reference note would be okay, to be revised to the satisfaction of Public Works Department, including revisions to sheets SP1, SP3, and P2, to indicate the off-site connection to sewer manhole 82.
Does that work for you, Ken?
Yes, it does.
Any members of the board
It's okay.
disagree with that, or is that the consensus of the board to go along with that as a first solution?
Yep.
All right, we're happy with that. What's next?
We still have 2 outstanding subdivision waivers, but before I get to those, I just want to give the board a brief update. There was an abutter here last month, Michael Petroselli. He lives nearly directly opposite of our Road A as it connects with Wire Road. He had emailed staff, and I hadn't had a chance to read that until I got home that evening. I had made a commitment during that meeting that I would reach out to him and see if there was something that we could discuss and come to an agreement on. I'm happy to say that we met on site about a week and a half to 2 weeks ago, looked at his property, how it relates to the new road access, what may or may not be able to be done to help potentially mitigate any issues or concerns he had. We came up with an offer for some landscaping to be installed. We have a written letter that we've provided to him, and we had pretty much a verbal understanding as we left that site that we would provide that letter to him. And as far as I'm concerned, it's a private matter that wouldn't necessarily be part of any conditional approval. However, we did follow up. We do have a landscaping package, if you will, with a potential for a couple of different options for him. I think it includes 7 shrubs and some landscape mulched area that could be placed in 1 or 2 locations of his choosing. So in some configuration that he's satisfied with. So we followed through with that. I just wanted to share that with the board, although it's not necessarily part of what I would consider a conditional approval, since it's a private matter between 2 private parties. And I take it by his lack of response to the email and the letter, and his absence tonight might, although isn't necessarily an affirmative, it's certainly suggests that he's okay.
Thank you for explaining that. Thank you for reaching out to them. I agree with you that it isn't part of a condition of approval or part of a thing, but I also, and you've come before me enough times to say that I always try to encourage people to go be neighborly and solve these problems as best they can, and you deserve the congratulations for when you do that. So I'm glad to see that that's a result that you guys have followed through on. So thank you for that.
Now onto the subdivision waivers. I have 2, and my previous letter that I had submitted was fairly poorly worded to a cut and paste. I didn't specifically call out the proper roads for one of our waivers. Our first waiver in our official letter, dated September 27th, 2016, is relative to the short cul-de-sac roads B, C, D, E, and G, specifically not including F. And we're requesting a reduction of the 2% road grade requirement to 1.5. And I explained this last month, and perhaps even the time before, that given the road grades on site and the depth to sewer and the basically shallow depth to sewer that we're trying to hold, we wanted to reduce the negative 2% as we left Road A on 5 of those short cul-de-sac roads. If you take a look at the staff memo relative to the waiver requests, I'll read into the records the comments from DPW, and it states that the request of the negative 1.5% grade versus the negative 2% grade may be okay so long as Meridian can prove that there will be no water ponding at the intersections from this change. The areas in the radius sections of the intersections are prone to puddling water. We could expect that Meridian show a detailed grading plan for each intersection where the grading waiver is granted. And we've done a similar detailed grading plan on a couple of other subdivisions in town where there could potentially be a problem if we didn't have additional detail for the contractor during the grading. So we're fine with providing that extra detail during construction. By definition, a 1.5% grade can't puddle because it's a constant 1.5% grade. However, it comes during the construction. So while I can guarantee our design won't puddle, I can't guarantee that construction won't. All I can say is, yes, we'll follow up with some more detailed spot grading for the contractor during construction.
Thank you for the explanation, Ken. Now, when you finish all of this, your roadways are gonna have to be bonded during construction, and then a performance bond or maintenance bond afterwards. And so if puddling or ponding comes about within the couple of years after it's built, those bonds are gonna be available to remedy that,
I would suspect that that could be an item that could be called, sure.
unless you guys come and fix it yourself. Tim, am I crazy on that, or is that the appropriate way to think about it?
It is, however, I agree that, and I think Ken's fine with Kyle, as he said, Kyle has requested these small little grading plans of the intersections, and they seem to work well to
Oh,
address that.
yeah, I have little doubt. I mean, I agree with Ken. If you slope something a 1.5%, the water's gonna flow. It's the way that gravity works. But at the same time, if there's any thought about whether that will actually be built that way. Since this is a request for a waiver, you want to do both of your waivers at once and then have the
I
board
think it's
consider them
probably
and
better
discuss?
to close this particular item first before we move on.
I don't see any problem with allowing this waiver, subject to the condition that Kyle's put forward to have those
Okay.
plans, the bond. I don't know if anybody else has comments or questions about it.
Just one question, Mr. Chairman. The reason you've done it is because of the shallowness of the sewer system.
Yeah, early on in this project, I spoke too soon and I suggested that the site was so flat, it's going to be fairly easy to take care of this site. It's going to be very little impact and very little changes in grading. Well, it turns out, given the sewer cover that we have, effectively this is the end of the line from a gravity system. And so therefore, we're really fighting depth on this. And it turns out that the terrain is so flat naturally that we are forced to try to create grade change in order to then direct our stormwater in certain locations so we can treat it. Well, in doing so, we looked at probably about 5 or 6 different waiver items and sat down with Kyle and said, well, you know, it's sort of like a la carte. We'd like to pick and choose. Maybe we can do this, maybe we can do that. One of them might require a little bit less cover over the sewer and we have to insulate a pipe. We had a short list of options of what we may need to consider during the design. Ultimately, we came down to just this one particular waiver. And as we leave Road A, negative 1% or 2%, the deeper we go, if it's 2%, that means we're going down. And we really don't or can't go down to any great depth. If so, then all of our roads would have to be that much more artificially filled in order to create that. So
To stay
the
above
purpose
soil.
of this is really, it's a
I've
tremendous...
got, Mr. Chairman, I've got that bit.
Oh, sorry.
What my bit is, if it doesn't work and you do puddle, just if, how are you going to do anything about it? Because you've got nowhere to go
That would-
because the sewer's right
That
there.
would be a
You're-
construction, there would be shimming with pavement, so they might actually have to grind some pavement and then adjust and shim pavement. It's not like you're going to be removing the entire
No.
road box.
All right, I'll buy into it.
It's more of a pavement remedy at that point.
Okay, I understand, but I just wonder that...
Sorry for misunderstanding the question.
To remedy a bad situation, you've got very little nowhere to go other than, as you rightly say, fill the whole of fill the rest of the road systems to get the cover back.
So in that case, it's more of a pavement remedy than road grade as far as
Okay,
height of fill.
Any other comments or questions? What's the will of the board with respect to the road grade waiver request? No?
I'll make a motion, Mr. Chairman, to grant the waiver as requested because imposing it would, let me find the right words again.
unnecessary hardship.
Yeah, would would pose an let me see, the particular circumstances relative to the subdivisions and the condition of the land in this subdivision indicate that the waiver will properly carry out the spirit and intent of the regulations.
All right, there's a motion by Mr. Disco, second by Jeff Sebring. Any discussion? All in favor of granting the waiver, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? That is 7-0-0 to grant that waiver. So let's talk now about the waiver of the surveying the bounds along the right-of-way.
Yep, we went into some detail on this last month as well, where the specific request is not overall that we are not intending to set any monuments on the site. It was specific, it was a partial waiver, and it was specific to the road frontage bounds along the open space lots on both Wire Road as well as Pearson Road. And I've zoomed into a particular sheet 7 of our plan set to illustrate this. This is in the southwest corner of the subdivision, and you can see in this image we have stone wall along Wire Road. In this corner of the property, we are proposing a granite bound. However, at the end of this wall section, there's a stone, the last stone that marks the sideline of the right-of-way. However, we're not proposing a monument at this location. A monument here would not serve a purpose of marking the sideline of the right-of-way. In fact, the wall itself is the monument, and the wall is readily apparent. A monument would serve no purpose at the end of this wall. If we then continue on, obviously, once again, we're proposing to install the new road monuments, as I've said all along, but as we move up, again, here's an end of a wall on Wire Road, and again, this is all open space land adjacent to it. A monument at this location, where again, the wall itself is the monument from a survey standpoint, it serves no purpose.
So explain to me why our requirement would want a monument there. I mean, it's not, the road doesn't curve or bend or whatever, it's not a corner of the lot. Why would that be a monument?
Technically, it's an angle point. So if you think of a curve that might be more distinct to you, where this is a more drastic change in the geometry of the alignment of the sideline, an angle point is a change in the alignment of the sideline.
It is, but I don't even see a 1-degree angle point with what you were just showing me there.
In that case, I'll give you an example on Pearson Road. So here we are on Pearson Road. There are no
there
walls.
I see an inflection. That it's clearly the road curve or has a bend in it.
This particular lot, we're gifting to the town, and we were hopeful that, at least at this time certainly, that there's no need to set monuments along Pearson Road. There's a comment in the regulations, or sorry, in the memo that states this lot here, which now we are knowing is calling 7D360. It had been a correction in the assessing records recently that this is the new number for this. Those lot corners should have been set in previous surveys, but never were. We're proposing we can set, and be happy to set those. We were just trying to cut down on the number of unnecessary monuments along the open space lots, because there's not residential development at all, and quite frankly, we don't know that they'll ever be developed in any way. This particular lot on Pearson, which has been offered for public recreational use. Again, this is an open space lot that has a different level of potential uses if the town chooses, but it's not necessarily required. You know, from a survey standpoint, it's easier for me to understand that I could go out and tie into a property line on one side of the property and easily define the sideline of the right-of-way. I recognize Kyle would like to have him or anybody in the DPW crew step out of a truck and see a monument along the sideline. I get that. I understand that what his needs are or believes he needs is different from what I think might be realistic in this particular instance. So while I firmly believe it's reasonable to ask for this waiver for these two open space lots for the frontages, I also have to point out that Kyle, or through Dawn now, is opposed to it. So I guess I've discussed this several meetings here. I think you've asked questions. I'm happy to answer more questions, but I guess it's really up to what the board feels you'd like to do.
Any comments or questions by members of the board? Tim, I'm sorry, I didn't see you over there.
Just for my own purposes, I tend to side more on the public works side of this discussion. In my 19-plus years of doing this, the only time I've ever recommended a planning board grant waivers for monumentation is when they're unable to be set due to wetlands or other specific topographic conditions. So that's where I've always stood in terms of monumentation waivers.
Other comments or questions? Nelson?
Mr. Chairman, I wouldn't be in favor of granting this waiver. I think the boundaries are something that the town has required most everywhere. I don't see a compelling reason, such as wetlands or something that's present in these particular cases. In fact, I see some good reasons why maybe Kyle would want them, so I'd be opposed to granting that waiver.
Other comments or questions?
Mr. Chairman, I think I can agree with that as well.
Others? Is there a motion?
I'll make a motion, Mr. Chairman, to deny the waiver.
Is there a second for Nelson?
Yeah, second that.
Motion by Nelson, second by Mr. Milnes to deny the waiver of the,
What criteria? The first or the
it's
second?
You
denied.
don't need to waiver, the
Don't-
criteria to deny a waiver.
My bad.
Although for some reason that motion should fail, we'd have to figure out what that criteria would be.
What to do with it?
Yeah, what to do with it then. Okay, so I want to make sure that I said that enough for Don, who's got to keep the record. Nelson's motion, Alistair's second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? One opposed? Any abstaining? Okay, so the motion to deny the waiver passes 6-1-0, with Mr. Sebring voting opposed. So, the waiver is denied. Are there other items that you want to introduce and discuss with us as we go through this, or?
No, that's, out of all of the remaining or outstanding items that are left in the staff and Keach memo, largely housekeeping, certainly things that we can address and resolve with staff. So at this point, that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any last minute questions that you might have.
Does the board have any questions of the applicant regarding any part of the application before the board takes up the notion of final approval? And I am going to have a public hearing again, even though there's somebody here to weigh in on one, but.
Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask a little bit about the gravel pit reclamation. We talked a little bit about it, as I remember. We've had some discussions about it, and it was kind of vague, left kind of vague to me as to what was gonna go on there and what we're going to end up with in that gravel pit area that's.
Well, as you may
Active
recall, we are utilizing about half of that area for some house lots, a community area, as well as drainage. That's to the south end of what's now being utilized. The rest of the north end, we don't have any plans specifically as part of the subdivision to do any reclamation. However, there may be some that's associated with its current use. As you may recall, it's being utilized as laydown and storage area for a couple of town projects. I don't know the details of what that agreement is as far as how they are to leave the site. But at this point, we don't have a more formal reclamation plan.
It seems to me that one would be appropriate in this final approval stage that we're at, to have some plan or some concept or something on the plan that would show what's going to happen there. And it won't be a gravel pit forever, and
It
That's
certainly
all,
wouldn't continue to be a gravel pit. In fact, it hasn't been used in that way. Currently, again, it's used for laydown and storage. Suffice to say that the improvements that are shown on part of our plan set, and again, they utilize about half, the southerly half of that pit area. It's in the applicant's absolute best interest to make sure that it looks and is taken care of properly, because you're going to have the residents of the subdivision utilizing the area for recreation on the south end of it. Not to mention there'll be about 5 or 6 homes that have a direct view out their back windows across that area. So I can't say again that we have detailed descriptions of what will be done, because I don't know what the duration and agreement is as far as the towns or the contractor doing the town work, what he has in mind. But suffice to say that it's, from a marketing standpoint, it certainly needs to be cleaned up to some degree so that it's aesthetically pleasing out as a view, which goes to proper grading and whatnot. But we've never had a plan contemplated through any of the staff review or peer review on that item.
You've got topographics of what it's finally going to look like in terms of the grading and all that.
For the portion in the area that we're utilizing, but
for
not
all of it.
necessarily to
I gotcha.
The
the rest of the north portion of it.
Tim, my memory is when we saw the Longo property and the property off Daniel Mulligan Parkway, that a reclamation plan is kind of the normal process of stopping the use of a gravel pit, isn't it?
If it's being used for gravel excavation under RSA 155E, which this really isn't, it's being used as a laydown and storage area.
Well, it isn't now, but at least it once was, and it never
But
got reclaimed.
The question is whether or not it ever had a plan that was approved by the town to do that, because that's typically where the reclamation plan would come into play, is through a gravel pit approval through the planning board under that statute.
One of those two that we talked about before, though, also didn't have its original gravel pit excavation process, and that's why it was before us with some confusion. I don't remember
I don't
which one it
recall which
was
one
of
it
those
was,
two,
yeah.
but
I think, Mr. Chairman, your memory is really right, and I would say it is the area up nearby the Daniel off the Parkway near where the caravan people are. Yeah, I think that's where we had that issue, that it had been going along so long that there never ever was a proper reclamation plan.
and maybe they were just before us because they were talking about what was going to be next with the property. They're going to build a office building or something.
That was where Atrium was originally going to
Yeah,
be going.
it was for Atrium
And
that
so-
came up.
That wasn't really a reclamation plan. It was just a site plan for what was going to happen next. And that's basically what, well, this is subdivision, not site plan, but same concept. And the other folks weigh in or discuss what Nelson's got in mind with wanting to know a little bit more about how that gravel pit area is going to be featured as a part of the common area. And I don't know that I hadn't thought about this before until Nelson brought it up, but obviously, having walked the site and looked at it, there's enough areas where, kids playing could find steep slopes and some things that are probably a whole lot of fun for boys to go play on. But nonetheless, might be worthy of a little forethought. I don't know.
It seems there should be some notes, at least, covering what the intent is there and what will happen there, or what is planned to be happening, even if it's loam and seed. Doesn't have to be any
I would say
tennis courts or anything, but
I would offer that we'll come up with an appropriate solution with staff on that. I can't promise, but I can see obviously that some level of loam and a wild mix of grass, not something that would be maintained and mowed necessarily, but that's obviously appropriate, but I can't make any guarantees. I think that's something we can come up with a plan of action and share with staff to their satisfaction. But I'll commit to making a note on the plan of what we believe should be the final disposition of the remaining former gravel pit area.
Okay. When you've got that worked out with staff, I want to make sure that that just gets distributed to the planning board members in a packet, maybe for informational purposes only. I don't want to certainly have this applicant come back, but obviously Nelson's going to have some interest in having a chance to look at it. So.
Yeah.
Other comments or questions?
Mr. Chairman, sometimes on some of these big projects, we've had a part of the project, we've had a phasing plan. Is there going to be a phasing plan, or are you just going to, if you like, build the roads and then just start? Or what?
Well, surprisingly, there's no phasing is actually required in these developments. However, we do have a note on page 1, if I'm not mistaken, 22. And it's a rather simple note. It reads, the development may be phased by individual roads and their related infrastructure, with Road A constructed first and subsequent roads to follow at the discretion of the developer. Again, some of this phasing is market-driven, obviously, if there's a higher demand. So given the nature of the road configuration, it's just so very logical that Road A starts.
Well, I mean, obviously Road A has to be there, and because I understood that bit, but I'm just wondering whether you're not really going to produce a phasing plan. You're going to do it as demand exists for the properties.
Correct. And again, there's no phasing requirement in the
No,
coastal
all right.
residential development
I
regulations.
just asked.
I think when we've seen these before is more with the CUPs or with the condos or what's that? Definitely with those, but I mean in the projects where there was some common use infrastructure like a clubhouse or something that you wanted to make sure got built and somebody didn't build all the residences and decide that phase one was in the books, let's go on to something else. And that doesn't really apply here because there's none of that stuff to be constructed, I don't think. But I think that note adequately covers phasing as far as I'm concerned. Other thoughts, Nelson?
Just a thought, it seems to me the sewer has to go in first, doesn't it?
That's note 25.
What?
That's note 25.
Okay, I'm sorry, I don't have note 25 before my.
Yeah, we
That's the one we were discussing
Those
before.
are too small to read for me.
We talked about note 25 earlier in the evening, relative to
Okay.
making sure it's all tied together and understood that the sewer extension has to be installed, or there is.
Yes, the extension, but
Yeah.
the sewer within your development is what I was talking about. You'd have to put that in pretty
Clear-
much first, right?
Clearly, as the road construction for Road A happens, the
Yeah.
sewer is installed, just
Yeah.
as the water is as well.
Yeah.
Subgrade before you.
For the
bring
whole thing, yeah.
Or else he'll be
Yeah.
tearing up his own road because he can't get a CO for the house that he built with no sewer.
Yes.
Not a good plan.
All right, I think Logic dictates they'll manage that one on their own. Other comments or questions? For the sake of the record, let's gavel open a public hearing and see if anybody wants to weigh in. All right, we'll close the public hearing.
I think.
Before anybody makes a motion, just wanted to go through and talk about the revisions we've talked about here tonight. The first one I have is that we add a new condition relative to the final disposition of the former Gravit Pit area will be addressed through process with town staff, and that notes or other information to the plans will be added as applicable. And then in the DPW comments, Part M would be revised relative to the note 25 being revised to the satisfaction of Public Works, specifically providing the revisions that is calling out revision, and also the revisions to sheets SP1, SP3, P2 to graphically depict and show the sewer connection to sewer manual 82. I don't think I had anything else.
Yeah, the stop signs
Stop
go
sign.
away,
That's per what we have written already, so.
and we denied the waiver, so the waiver, if the
And I had a
waivers are
comment
indicated anywhere,
relative
that's
to
fine.
making sure that's there in case the waiver was denied.
I don't think we've talked about anything else new or additional tonight. What's the will of the board? Any more discussion, or are we ready to take final action? Desiree, is that a motion?
Yes, it's a motion to take final action tonight.
All right.
With the conditions as Tim just outlined in the staff memo and as outlined verbally by Tim
All
tonight.
right. So Desiree moves for conditional final approval subject to the conditions in the memo and those outlined by Tim. Is there a second for
Yeah, I'll
Desiree's motion?
second that, Mr. Chairman.
Second by Mr. Milnes. Any other discussion? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? 7-0-0 for conditional final approval. Thank you so much, Ken.
Thank you very much.
And Ken, thank you for all of the work that you do to work through these. You've really become really proficient at these complicated projects and spending the time it takes to work through neighbor issues and question issues and sidewalk issues and lots of things that are involved with these complicated ones. And your clients are well served.
Thank you for saying that in front of them.
There you go.
I would echo that, Mr. Chairman.
What did he say?
No, you got the address to send the check to, right?
Oh.
All right, so that brings us to item 4 on the agenda, which is discussion and possible action regarding other items of concern.
2017 schedule.
There is a 2017 schedule in our package. It doesn't require any official action by the board, but take a look, does it require?
Just a consensus is all I'm looking for. Just, I think between staff, all 5 members of my staff have gone through this to try to make sure that we didn't hit any issues with holidays or
Holidays, no.
anything like that, and that the deadlines all work, and we avoided as many conflicts with the zoning board as we could. So I think we've got, the zoning board just approved their schedule last meeting, so you're up next.
All right.
Staff
Looks fine to
birthdays,
me.
there's no birthdays, no.
Yeah, you didn't have a meeting on my birthday or anything like that. As far as consensus, from my opinion of consensus, my 1/7 of consensus, I'm in favor of this. This looks fine to me.
Just the same note that both the months of July and November, we've gone with one meeting due to the holidays that are in both of those months.
Yeah, this is good for planning purposes. And
Yep.
And
And the
as we
room
did here
reservation.
tonight, there's always the option at the chairman's discretion to call additional meetings as necessary.
There you go. Okay. Tim, anything else to discuss under other items of concern?
Not
Any-
tonight.
Does anybody else have any other items of concern? Brings us to the approval of minutes of September 6th, 2016.
I
It's the will
move-
of the board.
I move that we approve the minutes as written.
So motion by Desiree Fault to approve the minutes as written. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Redding. Any other discussion?
Yeah, I've got a couple.
All right, let's have them.
things, yeah. Let me see, let me be sure that was okay. On page 3, under public comment, the second to last sentence,
Line number, please?
page 3, then on page 3, there's a,
Line number.
Line number.
oh, okay, line number 34,
Perfect.
35. Planting shrubbery would not help the situation. Now, that sentence, it doesn't say whose thought that was. I thought it would be a good idea, frankly, and I think Mr. Clinton did and the neighbor did. So I would propose striking that sentence and just,
Recognizing that the sentence is minutes, which is recording what was said, that was said, and it was said by Ken.
I would
As it
say that
turns
we
out,
put a
they've all decided
we put a
otherwise.
comma after Petroselli and lowercase on planting.
Yeah, I think that's fine. If you put those sentences, yeah, the Ken Clinton will discuss the concerns of Mike Petroselli, comma, planting shrubbery would not help the situation. And as it turns out, they've decided otherwise, but this is still
At
what
that
the
time,
discussion
that's
was
what it was.
at this meeting. So, does that satisfy?
well, sort of different than what we did, but it's okay. I don't,
No, but recognize what minutes are.
yeah,
That's what was discussed at that meeting.
okay.
Is there another one that you said
No,
you had a
that's
couple?
it. That's it. The others were questions that have been resolved by the
Oh, okay.
previous discussion.
All right then. Any other edits to minutes? All in favor of approving the minutes as edited, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? 700 to approve the minutes. And with that, that brings us to our adjourn.
Well, Mr. Chairman, could I just ask one question?
Curse.
I know Nelson has been very diligent setting up this presentation for, I forget the lady's name, but
Yes, okay.
yeah.
Rebecca Harris.
Are we
Yeah.
sending that invitation out to all and sundry, or are we confining it to ourselves?
We are now. First, we have to set the meeting.
The meeting we did set earlier tonight.
I beg your pardon.
I do plan on sending out notification of that to other boards and commissions.
It was my hope that we would have others in attendance.
Yeah, we'll invite
This-
the
this-
world, but we
Yes,
had to
the
first
world, yes.
actually take the action to have a
Yeah.
meeting that day first.
My concern was somehow to make sure that the people who we really need to get there, and I'm thinking of those who are the sort of what I would tend to class in the anti-brigade for all these, if I'm thinking of sidewalks and the antis we've met up with for so long. I mean, this board is, to my mind, totally committed to what this lady's going to present. I feel 100% certain.
Well, that's
I-
nothing
The
wrong with
plan
getting the
was,
information,
the
but-
plan was to invite any land use related board as well as the town council.
That's correct.
And
all
in
right.
that regard, all we're allowed to do is invite. We can't,
yes.
we can't have the police go and haul them out.
No,
To get
I
'em on
wasn't
down.
quite. I was looking to see how we could make it enticing. I'm thinking particularly of certain members of the town council, and I do not.
I can ask
include-
Kate to make cookies or something. Is that?
And I'm not.
Would that
I'm not reflecting on the member of the council who's here present. That there seems to sort of there are one or two people who seem very anti these sort of ideas, and I was wondering how we could seduce them to come.
Well, I would offer at least one suggestion, in that as all of our meetings are, it will be televised and replayed over and over.
Okay.
And I would find that any counselor that has some interest in it, even if they can't come, would certainly have the opportunity if they chose to. And if they don't, well, we've done what we can do.
There you are, Mr. Chairman. I'll pass on.
Yeah, it'll be on YouTube. They can kind of take a look.
Mr. Chairman, if having raised that issue and been quietly put down, may I make a proposal that we adjourn?
So motion to adjourn by Alistair. Is there a second? Second by Desiree Fault. Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? 700. And don't forget to turn your microphones off.
Is showing us it's getting any better. So, you know, our position is that the water should be filtered. It should be filtered for all wells, public and private. And I think one of the remedies, at least for Litchfield, is they're trying to put those guys on Pennachuck water today because there's a lot of private wells there. It might be a good suggestion here as well. Due to long-term ingestions of PFCs, we want to make sure that people, and these are some of the things we've already talked about, we want to make sure people do have access to blood tests. An arbitrary, you know,